So this is the final one of the sequence of kind of modal exploration, and this one I also do as this is an exercise a lot with students when I'm teaching, which is literally to take 8 bars or 4 bars of any jazz standard or kind of like jazz composition, and see if you can spot as quickly as possible common tones that thread all the way through those 4 or 8 bars. This is again fairly easy on certain standards, but on other ones, again, I'll cite Wayne Shorter as a very good example of a much more challenging thing. Often it's much harder because you know, his chords go all over the place and do not necessarily follow the usual diatonic rules. So the idea here, and I go back to Autumn Leaves, the usual 8 bars: F7, sorry, C minor 7, F7 flat 9, B flat major 7, E flat major 7, A minor 7 flat 5, D altered, G minor 7, G altered. What I'm looking for now is common tones between each of these modes and scales. And now the way I'm going to do this basically is, I've already talked about what mode goes over which chord type. And of course, if you read George Russell and the Lydian chromatic concept of tonal organisation, which I would highly recommend, is a fascinating book, regardless of whether you know, what you think of the actual kind of theory of it. One of the most important things I got from that was the concept of the chord mode, all right? In other words, when I started jazz, I didn't really know much about it, and literally the only thing I had as an educational sort of tool was recordings, because this was in the 1980s that I was learning it, and one video by Joe Pass called Pass Lines, which was actually, now I know, the most amazing video I could have had, frankly, as a jazz guitarist. Everything you would virtually need is sort of in there alongside recordings. But what I didn't understand at the time that you would have a chord, and to me then there would be a sort of scale, and I didn't really get the relationship. And as Russell says in his book, really what we've got is that the two are completely interchangeable. When I've got a C Dorian, okay, if I extract out of that cluster of notes the root, the 3, the 5 and the 7, I've obviously got a chord. So it's not like here's a chord and there's a scale that goes with it. The scale is simply part of the chord itself. So when we actually understand that, and I think of, again, sort of like this whole you know, diminished half whole thing, you know, technically that big thing there that I've just played, or this division of the notes, is the scale and the chord itself. They're completely interrelated, and if you understand that, you realise then that you've got all this stuff to play with, and when you're voicing chords, you know, I can put my hands on as many notes as I possibly want. It's useful, obviously, to know the triad, the 7th, the chord tones, you know, in terms of this kind of forward motion principle, but in the end, all of the kind of notes are sort of accessible. So what I'm going to do now is we're looking for common tones in terms of Autumn Leaves. Now this is not going to be difficult because you can already probably tell that there's going to be a lot of common tones within the sequence. If I start on the first note of C Dorian, then I'm going to now see whether C is going to work over the F7 flat 9, and of course it does, because it's there, all right? If I play over the B flat major 7, it's the 2nd. Over the E flat major 7th, it's the 6th. Over the A minor 7 flat 5, it's the minor 3rd. Over the D7, it's the 7th. Over the G minor 7, it's the 4th. And over the G altered, it's the nothing, because it isn't in there, and that's the interesting bit. So I can either go up, and you can hear the tension straight away, or I can go down, all right? So, and what I really love to do is, within those 8 bars, can we find a common tone that lasts through all of those notes? And there is one. But what you want to be able to do is to look at a chord sequence and have such a good modal knowledge in the end that you can literally spot it. And now you might ask, well, why would you want to do that? Well, actually, you know, common tones are a really good way of anchoring lines, again, by creating a sense of sort of unity through them. It's another technique that you can actually use. It's not that I'm going to play a solo where it's going to go, you know, I mean, I could do that, but it's going to be sort of like quite boring if I continue that way. But what I can do is use it as a sort of anchor point for... that kind of idea. Sorry, that was quite a splodgy example, but you get the general idea. I can use the actual common tone itself as some sort of anchoring kind of note to create some sort of unity. So you'll notice again, in this instance, this is another way of creating something where you are allowing it to sound like it's kind of one thing, even though the chords are changing all the way through. And this is another way of navigating much more complicated sequences, again, like something like Herbie Hancock's compositions, which also can be incredibly challenging with all sorts of kind of disparate chords. Something like Dolphin Dance is a good example. It goes all over the place, but actually if you can see common tones between some of the more complex changes, you can create lines, I think, that have got much more sort of like, not solidity, but coherence, the way you're actually playing it. So if I won't go through every single note, but the way I would do it now is, can I use a D? So I'm going to go up to the next note in the Dorian, and can I use a D all the way through the sequence? Yes, yes, third, yes, major seventh, yes, fourth, yes, root note, yes, fifth, yes, no on the G altered, because I'm going to have to change there. Next one would be the E flat. Can I use this? Yes, yes I can. It's the fourth of the major seventh. Again, root of the E minor seventh, flat fifth of the A minor seven, flat five, flat ninth of the D altered. Here, because I said I was going to use the Dorian, it technically should go there, but if I stayed with an Aeolian, I can use that, and I can also use it over the G altered because it's the augmented fifth. So in that instance, my E flat. But you'll notice as soon as I hit that major seventh chord, the one chord, you know, it's not the best note to kind of land on. I could stick it there, you know, it'll create tension. It's not a bad note or anything like that, but I might resolve it a little bit and then come back into it again. So you need to kind of, obviously, I'm not suggesting that you just hit this one note, but what I'm suggesting is it will anchor lines in a really interesting way. Can I use the fourth? Yes, yes, root, yes, fifth, yes, ninth or second, yes, the kind of flat and sixth, yes, I can use, that's the sharp and ninth, and then I've got the seventh, and there I've got it as the dominant, as the seventh of the altered as well. So this is the one where I can actually So that's another one. So the F actually is a common tone between all of those particular chords. Now, this as an exercise, as I say, if you take a particular progression, maybe the first 4 bars of Stella by Starlight or the first 8 bars of Stella by Starlight, what you're trying to do is see whether you can spot any common tones straight away between perhaps as many bars as you can. When that common tone stops and there's no way of actually doing it, and here again, I'm trying to be quite strict about which scales I'm using, then you would just move on to the next set of bars and see if you can see any common tones there. But it's a really good way to sort of like, again, sort of develop your modal skills of perception in terms of how you're actually approaching a piece. And looking at, especially again in more modern pieces, where there aren't diatonic sort of things holding it together, this is another way of actually creating some sort of, again, unity within the progression. If I go for the G, I can do that, but I can't do it straight away for the next chord. It's not in that diminished scale. I'd have to come up, and then I've got the 6th, 3rd, 7th, I've got to come up again here for the D altered, then I come back down for the root, so that's not a common tone, but you'll notice again there's an interesting contrast. without using a kind of anchor of that F and moving through, you know, different kind of like modes underneath it. Let's just finish up. Can I use A? Again, I can use A quite a lot. It's the Lydian of that one, major 7th for the last one. It's the root note. I've got to move it for the D altered, then back to the 9th for the G, and then again I've got to move it for the altered. And again, I'm trying to be strict about those scales. Finally, we've got the B flat. Yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, yes. There. And that's it really. Now these are all good exercises. In terms of sort of structuring your practice, it might be really good to take one standard, anything, you know, all the things you are, or you know, all of you. That's a nice one to have a look at. All of you is a very good one to have a look at. You know, it starts with a kind of like, you know, from the A flat minor 7 flat 5 to E flat major 7th, and you know, you could try the constant scale exercise. Then you could try the modal interchange idea. Then you could try the common tone idea. So basically it gives you 3 kind of exercises to really sort of hone in your kind of modal skills. The reason I'm not adding bebop notes into it, or kind of Barry Harris things, is from a personal perspective, and it's completely correct to go down the Barry Harris, you know, bebop thing if you want to. But for me, I would rather know the modes first of all as they kind of like sound naturally, and then add notes to it. Or, interestingly, why am I not going into pentatonic stuff? Because pentatonics are kind of almost subtractions of those scales as well. Again, they are scales within their own right, pentatonics. But if I know the entire mode, okay, I can then, you know, I can then subtract the kind of pentatonic from it as one of the sort of options. I can also use, you know, things like you know, triad pairs is another way of splitting it up. So there's multiple ways of doing it, but initially what I really want to know is, can I actually understand and use those modes as they stand, and really kind of get to grips with them moving through these progressions, and then I can start moving into kind of riffs, licks, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that was helpful. Like I say, I'm recording a whole course with PDFs, step by step, from chord tones all the way through to scales over the course of this summer, which I will release probably in September if you're interested. Thank you.